plan template. So today, as you can see, we'll do an overview of the adopted LCAP template. And then with that, we'll also talk about the 2019-20 annual update, which is a separate template that was also adopted by the state board. So you can see here the action that was taken at the California State Board of Education meeting in January. They adopted the new 2020 through 23 LCAP template that had minor revisions from the LCAP template posted with the January 2020 agenda item. And that was the link that was provided prior to the start of this webinar, the ability to download and look at the LCAP template. Also, another action that the board took was to update the local indicator of performance standards. The major change with that is that the local indicators and the data collected must be reported to the local governing board in conjunction with the adoption of the LCAP, and it would be done so as a non-consent item. So I talked a little bit about that. I stated that there were some revisions that were made that the state board adopted at the January meeting. And just to show, these are the difference in red and underline and strike through format to see that the revisions that were adopted by the LCAP, by the state board. So you can see on page 3, we just added, you'll see that on another page, when we added the word specific, we missed a couple spaces spots where we should have added it. And then the second aspect in the instructions for for stakeholder engagement, just to reinforce the idea that before adopting the LCAP, school districts, county offices must present the LCAP to parent advisory committees and, if applicable, the English Learner Parent Advisory Committee for review and comment. And with that, the superintendent must respond in writing to any comments received from these committees. And then also just that school districts, county offices must consult with the SELPA administrators, special education local plan area. Also revisions on page 11, again, you can see specific, and then also just some changing in this language. You can see we went from strongly encouraged to should, and should assess the performance of their student groups. And this language is more consistent with the statute that revised the LCAP template, which is Education Code Section 52064. So with that, obviously then the posted version of the template is not current, and we will make them available. Here, as you can see, the e-template, and then also the Word and Excel versions will be posted during that first week of February. And I'm just going to take this time to just really encourage all LEAs to consider using CDE's e-template or a version of an electronic version of the template. As we go through, and you'll see the expenditure tables and just the technology, especially between the two Excel and Word, if you will, versions, it really would be better to be using an electronic version. So today's January 14th. We're doing an overview, and here you can see the dates and the topics of the upcoming Tuesday at 2 webinar series. And we'll show this at the end of the presentation, and we'll be sending this out as reminders every week, as we have been doing so through the LCFF listserv. And if anybody out there is not a member of the LCFF, does not belong to the LCFF listserv, that's our main avenue for getting information out to the field, and would highly encourage you to sign up for that. So one thing that's different in this new LCAP was before the instructions began within is to just, there's more language behind each of these bullet points, but really the LCAP serves to 3 distinct but also interrelated functions. And that is the comprehensive strategic planning. And really the LCAP is kind of the final document to show it's not really a planning document, but it encouraged that strategic planning and then shows to the stakeholders, teachers, your community of what the LEA is intending to do to meet the needs of its students. It also is really a vehicle in the process of developing the LCAP is for meaningful stakeholder engagement. And I'll say, and Lydia will speak of that later during this presentation, but really stakeholder engagement was really high on the radar, if you will, of the state board, and also during public comment and feedback throughout this whole process. And then obviously accountability and compliance. Accountability, how are you doing with your students and meeting the students' needs and improving student outcomes? And of course, with any document, there are some guidelines and parameters and rules that one must follow, and that is there with that compliance aspect. So here's just a showing of a comparison of the 1720 template with the adopted 2023 template. You can see one section that's missing, if you will, is annual update, and that has, with the statute, has really infused the annual update and the analysis aspect into the goals and action services, goals and actions section of the new template. And you'll see that the increase for improved services section has been renamed really to call out those students that are the beneficiary of this increase for improved services requirement, and that is foster youth, English learners, and low-income students. And you could also see there that the addition of the expenditure tables as well. So every year, the law states that all LEAs must include an annual update. And to meet those requirements, the state board adopted a specific template for 2019-20 school year, that annual update that keeps those 17 through 20 and 20 to 23 templates separate and distinct. So another change and change, of course, and just change in general is the language of the LCAP. And the statute said that the prompts, that is the outward-facing aspect of the LCAP, very consistent with the budget overview for parents, should have language that's accessible to parents in the community at large. With that, the instructions will be more technical in nature, because that's what would guide the LEAs both for development of this LCAP and then also the reviewing and approving authorities, county offices of education and the California Department of Education to approve the LCAP. And then just as a reminder, school districts and county offices must prominently post the LCAP on the homepage of its website. Again, we're saying inside here that just you can't say it often and loud enough that the instructions are a critical part of the LCAP template with this new version of the template, because it has the full force of the law. It supersedes the prompt, and you'll see that looking forward that some of the prompts are really like, if you will, topic sentences of what the community would read, whereas the instructions are really being technical and explicit of what would be needed to sufficiently respond to those prompts. And as such, because the instructions are a part of the template, they will be and must be included when posting the LCAP. This is just a reminder of Ed Code, the statute and for approval criteria, in that adherence to the template, which it specifies in statute, includes following the instructions that was adopted by the State Board of Education. That there is sufficient expenditures in the budget to implement the actions in the LCAP, and then also that the LCAP adheres to the spending regulations as cited here in this slide. Another change that we'll talk about and certainly talk about in much more depth in the weeks to come is really the idea and encouragement of LEAs to really look at the prioritization of the planning process differently and look at outcomes in the dashboard to really hone in some prioritization of how to address specific LCFF priorities and actions and expenditures. And however LEAs will write the goals in any manner and types of goals, all priorities, all LCFF priorities and those relevant metrics must be tracked, addressed, and followed. The expenditure summary table is a new addition to this new LCAP. It states there what is required. Some changes that come with that and came with that is LEAs are no longer required to identify tax codes and track those expenditure in funds by tax codes. They are no longer required to differentiate between LCFF base, supplemental, or concentration grant funds. They are just LCFF funds. However, you can see here that all actions must be identified and broken out by fund source and then the percentage of personnel and non-personnel expenditures. And then we have shown this to be true, at least internally, that the expenditure tables, would substantially reduce the length of the LCAPs. And we've done that internally, taken a county office LCAP and plugged it into, if you will, into this current or this new template and reduce the size pretty close to half. So it should reduce the size of the LCAP. So one of the expenditure tables is the increase for improved services expenditure table. And you can see here in one of our stakeholder engagement sessions in Ventura, actually, there was a number of parents there. They really appreciated this specific addition of an expenditure table because it consolidates all the expenditures and the actions that are being used to meet the increased improved services for unduplicated students. And it clearly specifies if those services are being provided on an LEA-wide, a school-wide, or being targeted to a specific student group. Yet another change, and this is in the instructions, and it is required any LEA that has a numerically significant group of English learners, and that number consistent with Ed Code section 52052, that significant number for English learners is 30. And if an LEA has a numerically significant group of English learners, they must include an action related to, at a minimum, the language acquisition programs in the LEA. Those language acquisition programs are defined in Education Code 306, and the actions must also address the professional development activities for English learners. With that, LEAs still will report on progress in the EL metric. So we'll pause here for a second. I'm going to put us on mute so you can't hear us, trying to read the screen, but look at any questions that we might be able to answer before we move on to the next section. We'll be right there. Okay, we have a couple questions that we'll move on. There was a question about, and we haven't addressed, the budget overview for parents. That is still required. That is not changed, and technically that is to be provided as an overview, as a cover page to the LCAP itself, and so it would be included. The budget overview for parents requirement has not changed. There was a question about sufficiency of budget expenditures. Is that correct? In that, so bottom line is if you put in your LCAP, you're going to spend X amount of dollars. That X amount of dollars has to be available in the budget to implement those actions. So a couple more, and then we'll move on. When there was a question about metrics, and Jonathan will try to answer that. And again, the purpose of this particular webinar is to provide an overview. If you will maybe be a little teased to have you join the other webinars to talk about the sections in more detail. And there was a question about supplemental and concentration grant funds. There's still a requirement to increase or improve services for students for unduplicated student group based on the number and concentration of students within the LEA to provide services over and above what's being provided to all students. We'll get into the detail in the weeks to come. That doesn't go away. It's just the identification of funds is no longer required to break out by base, supplemental, or concentration fund. So with that, I'm going to hand it over now to Lydia. She'll introduce herself and we'll move forward from there.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So I will be talking about the first two sections of the LCAP template, but before we do that, we felt it was really important to pause for a little to talk about some of the big shifts in terms of the organization of the actual instructions that are included with the LCAP template. As you will see when you access the state board item that was provided at the beginning of this presentation, you have the link at the top of the presentation, I believe. You will see that the instructions are basically divided into different areas. The first part of the instruction describes the purpose, and then after the purpose, the instructions provide information on related requirements, as well as the details on what is to be provided. For today's presentation, we will basically be providing an introduction for each section, if you will. We're unpacking the section. The specific requirements and instructions are in the final LCAP template, and for right now, you're welcome to refer to State Board Item number 2 in the January board meeting agenda. With that, let's go ahead and move forward to the LCAP plan summary section. So what you should see on your screen right now is a copy of what you should see in the LCAP template for the plan summary. You'll see that we maintained a plan summary section, and that this summary, that the purpose of the summary is still really to help the reader understand the LCAP. As outlined in the instructions, the purpose of the plan summary is to provide a meaningful context for the LCAP. Here, the LEA would provide information about the LEA community, as well as relevant information about student needs and performance. And then, of course, given that this document summarizes the LCAP, the content in this section should be clearly and meaningfully related to the content, obviously, in the rest of the LCAP. In terms of requirements and instructions, this part of the template calls on LEAs to provide general information right there at the top. This is where the LEA provides a brief description of the students and community. Next, they're called on to really engage in a reflection process based on dashboard and local data to identify their greatest success or their successes and needs. And then they move on to describe the LCAP highlights. This is where the LEA identifies and briefly summarizes the key features of this year's LCAP, much like we did in the prior LCAP template. And then this plan summary section also includes the CSI prompts, although we are not going over the details on those at this point. As a reminder, the plan summary section is typically completed last. And so that is the unpacking of the plan summary section. Pretty simple. It should look pretty similar to what we had before. Moving forward, we will be talking about the stakeholder engagement section of the LCAP. And I personally view this as the heart of the LCAP. As you know, stakeholder engagement is critical to the LCAP and has been a founding element of LCFF. Remember here that the LCAP development process serves 3 distinct but related functions, one of which is meaningful stakeholder engagement. And so consistent with statute, such stakeholder engagement should support that comprehensive strategic planning that Jeff described earlier in the presentation, the accountability and improvement across the state priorities and locally identified priorities. We know that local stakeholders possess valuable perspectives and insights about an LEA program and their services. Effective strategic planning will then incorporate these perspectives and insights in order to identify potential goals and actions to be included in the LCAP. As such, the LCAP development process should result in an LCAP that really reflects the decisions made through meaningful stakeholder engagement. And it's really important to point out here that this section is designed to reflect how stakeholder engagement influenced the decisions reflected in the adopted LCAP. Now, as with other sections, the instructions for this section outline the general purpose for this section and provide the related instructions and the requirements for completing or addressing these prompts. Furthermore, the instructions include a link to a web page that you will see that provides additional resources for stakeholder engagement. In terms of prompts, the stakeholder engagement section includes 3 major prompts. The first prompt asks LEAs to provide a summary of the stakeholder process and how the stakeholder engagement was considered before finalizing the LCAP. Then on the second prompt, the LEA is asked to provide a summary of the feedback provided by specific stakeholder groups. Moving on, prompt 3 asks the LEAs to provide a description of the aspects of the LCAP that were influenced by specific stakeholder input. In closing, these prompts allow the LEA to tell the story of how the LCAP was developed through its stakeholder engagement process. Before I turn it over to my colleague, Jonathan Spiegel, we would like to emphasize that this is a really critical nature of the LCAP and that the importance of stakeholder engagement in the LCAP development process. So we ask you to take time to review the instructions and related requirements, which are more detailed in nature as we prepare for the work ahead. And we'll pause here for questions.
So one question before we mute ourselves and look at some of the questions coming in was asked to clarify personnel versus non-personnel costs. And even though you're not tracking by SACS code, those personnel that are actually, keyed in the 1000s and 2000s, those are considered personnel. If you hire contractors, and I'm not a SACS code wizard, but I believe those would fall in the 5000s, those would not be considered personnel costs. There's some other questions about metrics that Jonathan will attempt to address, and also the increase for improved services requirement. But I'll just say with the S&C supplemental and concentration grant funds, again, you're not tracking by those, you'll still meet that increase for improved services requirement. We'll be back on just a second. There's a question about local indicators, and we'll get into more detail the week that we address the local indicators. It's too detailed for this point about what data is being used, but we'll talk about that. And at this point, we'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Good afternoon. This is Jonathan Spiegel, and here we have the new goals and actions section for the redesigned LCAP. And for each goal in the new LCAP template, you're going to have 3 parts. And you can see 3 of the parts here: goal, measuring and reporting results, actions. And then the 4th part is this goal analysis part. Note that this goal analysis part will not be completed in year 1. So in year 1, this will not be, you will not complete this. So for year 1, we're really focused on these 3 parts of the goal for each of the goals. We'll just, as a brief overview, kind of go over these three parts. And again, we have a webinar that's going to go over this in more detail at a later date. So the LCAP template encourages LEAs to prioritize their goals, and the way that it does this is by providing for the development of 3 different kinds of goals. And it's a focus goal, a broad goal, or a maintenance of progress goal. Now, there's no box there that you check, to indicate what type of a goal that you're developing. But the requirements for each of those different kinds of goals are different, as articulated in the instructions. And so, just to reemphasize the importance of the instructions, the instructions for this goals and actions section is 5 pages in length. And so there's a lot of explanatory information in there. And a good rule of thumb when completing the LCAP template is that don't respond to the prompts, respond to the instructions. So make sure that you read, if you fill out the template, if you write your LCAP based only on the prompts, you're going to miss significant parts of it. Looking at the measuring and reporting results. So on the left, you have your metrics, then you put your baseline. The baseline is based on the most currently available data. And then all the way over to the right, where you want to be in 3 years, this is your desired outcome for 2022 and -23. Those other columns, the year 1, year 2, year 3 outcome columns, for your first year of this template are going to be blank. These are actual outcomes. These will be reported, after the fact. So when you complete the year 2 LCAP for this 3-year LCAP, you will report year 1 outcome data. There was a question earlier about the metrics. The required metrics haven't changed. The required metrics are described and are essentially all the different metrics included in the 8 or 10 state priorities that have the statute. And so it's either 52060 subsection D for the first 8, and then there are 2 more for county offices, 9 and 10. But the metrics, the required metrics are still the same. Looking at the third part there, actions, you have your action number, title. The title serves in the expenditure tables to provide a little information about what the action is for without having to include the whole description in the table. We'll look at the tables in just a second, and you can see more about what I mean there. But keep that in mind when you're creating a title for the action, how it's going to look in the expenditure table. If you look over on the right-hand side there of the actions part, far right, you'll see the contributing column. And there you indicate a Y or an N or yes or no for whether or not this specific action is being included as contributing to meeting the increased or improved services requirement. And then you have total funds column. And there, if you're using the e-template, this amount will be auto-calculated for you. If you're using the Word doc / Excel spreadsheet version of the LCAP template, this will still be auto-calculated for you in the expenditure tables, but you'll have to copy and paste it over into this column. And then remember, that's the fourth part, the goal analysis part. And again, for year 1, that will not be completed. We'll go into why this won't be completed further down when we talk about the 2019-20 annual update part. It'll make more sense then. The next section we're going to look at is the increased or improved services for unduplicated students section. And the information required here is essentially the same information that has been required, has been asked for. It's asking for the same information, a little bit different order, a little bit of a different emphasis. The top there is the percentage to increase on improved services and the increased apportionment based on your enrollment of unduplicated students. And those 2 numbers can be found, among other places, they can be found in the FICMAT LCFF calculator. The 2 narrative prompts there below under required descriptions. The first one is where an LEA provides their justification for LEA-wide or school-wide services. So it's crucial that LEAs provide an adequate justification of their LEA-wide and school-wide actions that are being included as contributing to meeting the increased or improved services requirement. And this is where you would do it. And the instructions have more helpful information in them this time around to help LEAs provide those adequate descriptions. In the second prompt there under required descriptions, this is where you're describing how your LEA is going to meet its increased or improved services requirement. How is it going to increase or improve services for your LEA's unduplicated students by the percentage indicated up there in the upper left-hand corner as compared to what all students get. And this description is going to refer back. I'm going to go back a couple of slides here, and if we look at the goal part under the action. The action's part of the goal. On the far right, where it says contributing, it's Y or N. So for all of those actions, whether it's limited, LEA-wide, school-wide, any action that you've indicated as yes or Y, that it is contributing to the increase of improved services requirement, it's going to be captured in this last narrative response on this page in your description of how you're providing that increase to improved services. So you want that to sort of line up. And notice when you describe how you're going to meet your increased or improved services requirement, you're describing what it is that you're going to do. You're talking about your action. You're not talking about the money that you're spending. The meeting the increased or improved services requirement it's not a spending requirement. It's an outcomes requirement. Here are the expenditure tables. And so, again, if you use the Word doc / Excel format or version of the LCAP that will be downloadable, you can download it off the website. You'll have a data entry table. This will be one of the sheets in the Excel workbook. And again, this is one long, column. This is one long, one whole, sheet in the workbook. The column just broke across 2 rows because it's long. But you'd go in and you would fill in all the information, and then it would repopulate the following 3 tables here: the total expenditures, the contributing table, and the annual update table. Now, if you're using the e-template, the manner of inputting data is going to look a little bit different, but all of these tables will be generated for you either way. So the annual update, the contributing table, and total expenditures table, these 3 tables are the tables that are required to be posted with the LCAP. The expenditure tables and the instructions are both part of the LCAP template and must be included with your LCAP when it's posted, including the instructions and the expenditure tables. You can include the data entry table if you'd like. That's up to the LEA to do that. All right, and so I think we'll pause here. Before we move on, we will pause again and look at some of the questions. There's a question about outcomes. I'm going to go back to the goals section. And so here, and so in the measuring and reporting results part there in the middle, so the metric is what's being measured, and the baseline is going to stay the same for the whole 3 years of the LCAP. The desired outcome on the far right is where you're going to be in 3 years. And again, the desired outcome might change as you move, through the years, and those changes will be articulated in the goal analysis section in future years. What goes in the year 1, year 2, and year 3 outcome tables are reported after the fact, if you will. So when you're developing the year 2 LCAP, when you're developing the 2021-2022 LCAP. At that point, you will fill in year 1 outcome. So that's sort of like if you remember the prior template, that would be your actual outcomes in the annual update section. But here, the goals section has subsumed the function of the annual update section, and this is one of the ways that it's done it. And so year 2 outcome would be actually inputted when you're developing the year 3 LCAP, and then the year 3 outcome would be completed when you close out the LCAP as part of the annual update process. At that point, that would bridge to another 3-year template.
There's a question about CTE participation rate and AG participation rate. I think that's more in figuring of state priorities for the dashboard. Ed code 52060 and 52066 has not been changed as far as the metrics regarding these aspects. I think at this point we will move on to Redesign, and just give us a second, we'll be right there. You're on.
Good afternoon. My name is Redesign, and I will be speaking to the 2019-2020 annual update template. As stated earlier in the presentation, Education Code Section 52064 requires LEAs to review and update progress on goals in the existing LCAP. The 2019-2020 annual update template meets the annual update requirements while keeping the 2 3-year LCAP templates as separate and distinct plans. The 2019-2020 annual update section is relatively unchanged from the annual update section LEAs have completed for the 2017-2018 LCAP and the 2018-2019 LCAP, as this slide and the next slide shows. Please, however, do take note of the final prompt. This prompt has been changed to reflect the culmination of the 2017-2020 LCAP. The final prompt asks LEAs to reflect on the goal and what effect, if any, this goal has on informing the 2020-2023 LCAP. That was quick. We're going to pause here for questions.
So this question that says, to clarify, for 2021, they will not do the goal analysis in the goals and action sections. That is correct. Those will be intentionally left blank. And you address, as Redesign said, you'll address the annual update for the 1920 school year with the 2019 through 20 annual update template that was adopted by the state board. Again, folks, this is the schedule of webinar events. I'm going to pause you for just a second. So here's the schedule of webinar series upcoming. We'll go into, into the weeds more in depth of each of these sections as we move. We appreciate the questions that you've asked. We'll pause here a second again and look and see if there's any others we can answer. If we haven't answered, or if they're unique to your LEA or your school or your situation, again, you have the contact as far as feel free to reach out to. In fact, we appreciate the questions at lcff@cde.ca.gov. The questions really help us frame future webinars to make sure that we're addressing topics and information that you feel is important. One more pause, we'll be right back. There's a question about the order of the posting of the LCAP template. We'll be sending that out, but the order for posting purposes, the budget overview for parent would be first, as again, it's a cover sheet for the LCAP, but you would combine it into one document, followed by the 2019-2020 annual update with instructions, then the plan summary, then the stakeholder engagement sections, goals and actions, increase or improve services section, the expenditure tables, and then the instructions in its entirety. That would be combined into one document if you're not using the e-template, and posted prominently on the LEA's homepage. If one is using CDE's e-template, the web page that would be generated in that required order. There's a question about the expenditure table. They'll be provided when we post the first week of February in Microsoft Excel format, and then also the narrative aspect of the document of the LCAP would be in Word format. Again, I can't really stress strongly enough the encouragement to move over to an electronic version of the LCAP template. With that, again, we thank you so much for your time, and I'm glad you're with us. I hope you'll join us in the weeks to come as we look more deeply into each of the sections. And again, please feel free to email us, and it helps inform our learning as well. Have a great afternoon. Thanks again. Bye now.